Hi, and welcome back to Dog Speak Live. Today we have the wonderful Sarah Hedderly, who specialises in Border Collies. And Sarah's here today to just tell us more about the breed, why she got into Border Collie dog training, why she specialises in Border Collies, and touch on some of the behaviours that a lot of people out there, dog owners and some trainers, find difficult to deal with, why Border Collies do those things. Yeah. So let's just have a look at Sarah. Sarah is a dog trainer who specialises in working with owners and their Border Collies. Specialising in working with and just specialising and working with just one breed of dog gives Sarah a vast level of experience and unique insight into the breed, which allows her to a greater depth of knowledge to identify problems early, and has helped her develop her teaching framework to help owners create success. Prior to specialising in Border Collies, Sarah worked as I hope I get this right, McTominay animal chiropractor, and ran an in-person dog training class, mostly breeds around the control of unleashed system dog training. Let me say that bit again. Yeah, ran an in-person dog training class, mostly around the control of unleashed system of dog training. Her dogs have been her biggest teachers, and Minnie is a sensitive soul who needs her training broken down into the tiniest steps. And Dean is a child genius who needs clear direction and enough stimulation to keep his brain satisfied. He was a rescue and came to Sarah with several issues that they had to work through. Boo is a delight but has high drive, means they work on his arousal issues and all puppy related training. They all have different personalities, but have made Sarah read, learn, and find new ways to hone her skills into her breed specific training. Sarah also runs the Big Dingbat Dog Training and Border Collie Academy. Wow. Welcome to Dog Speak Live, Sarah. It's an absolute pleasure having you here today.
Thank you so much
And
for inviting me.
you've been on my mind for a while, as I said previously, when I first made contact. Um, but things happen, but here you are now. What I would like to know is what I ask all of my guests is how did you get into dog training and why Border Collies?
Well, I'm going to assume that a lot of us get into dog training because of one specific dog, or maybe several specific dogs that we own ourselves. So I've got Minnie, who is my mini American Shepherd. She's now 11. She was a really sensitive little soul. And all throughout my life before her, we'd had fairly easy dogs. They just fit in and we didn't know what we were doing, and perfect pet dogs. Minnie was very, very sensitive, lacking confidence. I had to learn how to read her body language more and to help her. So she was the main driving force about me getting into dog training as such. So I found Leslie McDevitt, who is the Control Unleashed system of dog training, and really it expanded from there. Now, Minnie is a mini American Shepherd, so she isn't a Border Collie, but I had had Border Collies previously. Our first dog was a Border Collie. And so, they were my breed right from the very start. But when I'd lost my very first dog, I couldn't get another Border Collie, even though we'd got other dogs at the time, because she was what I now refer to as a unicorn Border Collie. She was the perfect pet. And I would have compared to her. So I went a little bit off track, should we say, and I had a Springer Spaniel and then my mini American Shepherd. But then I was ready to return to Border Collies. So I learnt so much through Minnie, learning to break down the steps to help her build her confidence, and then to generalize behavior, but in teeny tiny steps so that she could succeed. And then in came Dingbat. my border collie who I got from Battersea Dogs Home, hence the back part of his name. So he came to me at 5 months old, a very, very intelligent. He was everything I wanted in a border collie. But with that came a lot of problems, because he'd been in a family home who were out at work all day, 2 young children, and he just hadn't been, brought up by meeting his needs. There was no abuse or anything like that, but he was a lot of dog for, a first-time dog owner or a young family. So he was, I hate to think of all of the unwanted behavior that he came with, as well as his genius behaviors. So we had a tough time bringing him in and, getting him where we wanted to. And totally different from Minnie. So Minnie was a little sensitive, needed lots of steps in her training to build her confidence. He learnt things in 1 or 2 repetitions, and then you had to progress it. So, he was totally different kettle of fish. He was bold, he was confident, he was frustrated, a lot of frustration behaviors. He had the potential for shadow chasing, for separation frustration. He bit me a lot out of frustration. And, he wasn't really a pleasant dog to be around, but he was devoted to me from the minute that I picked him up. So I had to learn fast, the other end of the scale, if you like, of dog training. So it's really those 2 dogs, even though I competed in agility with my Springer Spaniel beforehand, and we taught our previous dogs, just tricks and fun stuff as you do with pet dogs. It's those 2 dogs that really made me update, made me learn fast. Yeah, and why border collies? I remember back, my grandfather was a farmer, and he'd got 2 border collies, both black tries, called Scotty and Mickey. And I can remember them from when I was really little. I loved those dogs. They were just everything. And all of my dogs are black tri border collies now. So that's where my initial fascination came from. But when I started running dog training classes, they were mostly control and leash classes. So I got a lot of maybe reactivity, and dogs that were struggling really with their arousal levels. The majority of dogs that found me were border collies. And so it sort of was a natural progression in a way, to lead me to then just work with border collies. I suppose the start of it was because I love them, as with most things. But actually, the more and more that I worked with, the more and more patterns you can see in, their behavior and the things that they can struggle with. But all of a sudden, you're realizing when you're working with thousands of border collies, there's more patterns than what you really perceive from when you're looking at dogs in general. So things like, we obviously, when we have puppies, we would like them to be in a harness rather than having a collar. But quite often they might accept a harness when they're a puppy, get them to 6 months. And these independent dogs that are bred to work at distances, they don't want the confinement around their body. And then they become, unhappy about having the harness put on, the restriction. One of the typical things with recall, they like to play stay away, because that's what herding mode is. They come in so far and then they stand looking at you. If you move forward, they move back. If they move forward and you move back. And so people could take them on a walk, but then not catch them to put them back on the lead at the end of a walk and things like that. And obviously then my sort of passion about helping people with car chasing border collies. There's so many little nuances in what they do. And I've got friends who specialize in other breeds, and we sort of compare and contrast between the breeds, and they may display what appears to be the same behavior. So any dog that's, we'll label reactive in inverted commas, they can all lunge and bark at something, but
Yes.
what's that driving force behind it? Border collies can, what we call in collie language, is clap to the floor. So you get a border collie that's referred to as a clapper. So they usually got really strong eye for herding, but they'll put themselves on the floor and they'll stare hard at the thing. They've usually got a hard eye and they're not usually that brave. They're lacking a little bit of confidence. So that's herding instinct. But then, say, a golden retriever that throws themselves on the floor wouldn't be doing it through herding instinct.
Okay.
So it would be a different reason, even though it might present as the same thing. So I was talking to somebody that I know the other day who's got a German Shepherd that chases cars, but theirs is for a different reason than what a border collie might do. So it's the nuances behind it that then can help you get to the, the root of the problem a lot quicker, because you're understanding it from what's driving the breed, rather than just thinking, oh, this is a generic dog that's reacting to a car that's moving, because obviously border collies are bred to control movement. And so they might control the children, family members, cyclists, joggers.
It's a very important part when you bring up finding out the why. Why is this dog doing this? And a lot of people that don't understand behavior as such will put it in a generic look, perception, feeling, when the real thing is the border collie is doing it for a specific reason, the German Shepherd is doing it for a specific reason, and the Doberman is doing it for a completely entirely different reason. Yeah. And once we find out that why, is where we have that baseline of finding the right solution for the individual.
Yeah.
Which sort of brings me back to, you already touched on it, that some of the behaviours that border collies can present. If we go back to why they were originally bred, yeah, I'd be very surprised for anyone listening to this is not aware of what they were originally bred for. But can you just remind us, please?
Yeah, sure. So they're bred to herd, obviously, but there's so many nuances within that. So if we think of they're bred to work very independently at a large distance, they're bred to be impulsive, they're bred to think for themselves. There's so many parts of what we label herding. And usually if we look at unwanted behavior in our border collies, it's because of one of the things we've actually bred them for. So we shouldn't be complaining that our dog is doing something when actually that's what we bred them for initially. So they're very triggered by movement because their eyes are different to other breeds. So the rods and cones in the eyes are laid out differently. So they have more rods to detect movement, but they're also orientated more horizontally, which means that then they can see at massive distances, they can pick up movement because they're bred to go and find the flock to bring them back. So they need to detect teeny, tiny amounts of movement, and they can detect them at up to 900 meters away. So when you think about then working with general dog training with reactivity, and we all say to people, work at a distance that your dog can work at. But if your dog can detect something further away than what you can, how can you create distance?
You can't.
Yeah. So it's understanding that there is still an element of we work at distances, we can work them out, but it's about understanding that actually they'll still be able to detect movement at bigger distances. And so we have to work on maybe impulsivity or frustration tolerance because we've got them on a lead and they're bred to be independent and, working away from us. So when we start to think about all of those little nuances, it becomes a lot easier to understand why the border collie might be doing the things that they are.
Which is easy for you and I to discuss, or more easy for you to discuss, because I've just learned a few things about their eyesight, which I had no idea about. Yeah. When we look at the border collies that I would say a high proportion of dog trainers come across, these dogs don't have much space to maneuver. they're stuck in a house or
Yeah.
a flat. And with all the things you just suggested, they need to work at a distance. That's probably why they have so much frustration because they're not allowed space to be a border collie. Would that be correct?
It can be. It can also be the over visual stimulation. So if we're in a small house or, well, even a large house, if it's a busy house, let's just, regardless of size, they're always having visual stimulation. Whereas if you think about where they're bred to work, really, it's quite a quiet environment. There's big open spaces and you might go out and work them, but you haven't got the over flooding of all of the visual things that are going on. So cars whizzing past in a town would be very different to the number of traffic that goes past on a farm. You've got all of the people that are moving around. You've got more dogs moving around. And again, if you think about it, we don't breed border collies specifically to be sociable because they're bred to be out on farms. They're not bred to, meet loads of other dogs and people. So a common sort of thing that comes up is border collies in cars that can be very reactive because all of that overstimulation going past them. On a farm, they would do their work and then they might be put in the kennel or the barn for the night, where they have a total detox on overstimulation because they can't necessarily see very much and it's dark and it's quiet. But in a household, you might have people walking past them all the time, or they're very much the dog that sort of follows you to the toilet, aren't they? They don't they don't necessarily just stay and settle by themselves. All of the household noises, a lot of border collies I work with can react to the kettle, the microwave, all the normal household things. The Hoover is a big one. So they might attack the Hoover as well. These are all things that they necessarily wouldn't come across, but their hearing is also as acute as their eyesight. So some border collies suffer from noise sensitivity problems as well, because they're also bred to be very sensitive. So they can hear the flock at a big distance, as well as to be able to see them at a big distance.
So with a dog that is, my way of sort of putting it, sensitive,
Yeah,
yeah, really and truly, we need to educate dog owners that are looking to bring puppies or rescue collies into their home, really what the breed really is all about, before they take one on. Because I know we were talking about distance, and you mentioned that their eyesight is so good, but we still need a form of distance for them to have comfortability in the home. Yeah. And if they're that sensitive and that way inclined as a breed, then border collies really and truly need to be in a household that's quiet.
That would be the preferred.
Yes,
If
in a real way.
The breed. And again, there will likely be people listening to this that live in large families and the dog's really happy, just like our first unicorn border collie was. But the problem is that you can get dogs or border collies that are totally happy in that environment. Then you think you get another one and they're not the same as the first dog. But still the problematic behaviors are because they're a border collie. But then that dog is labeled as not normal, but actually it's just got more of the border collie traits driving its behavior. It's not to say that it can't work, it can, but it's just knowing how to help that border collie have an off switch, be able to relax and know that things aren't their job to do. So step down, I've got this, you can settle and I'll do everything, and control everything for you. So yeah, if they haven't got that clear boundary, they're such hard workers. They'll find their own jobs to do. And mostly those jobs are what we would refer to as unwanted.
I hear you, and it's very important that you sort of reminded me, and anyone listening to this. Yes, every dog is different, and every breed are going to have differences within those dogs. Yeah. Some dogs will get along with people, some will not. Some will comfortably curl up on the sofa and not worry too much about walks and all this enrichment stuff. And you're going to get those that say, well, I was bred to do this and this is what I want to do. If you move, I'm going to bite you.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that is important to remember. Um, but that's still for me, when I see or hear about border collies, for me, that they are definitely a specialist role. Yeah. Um, they're a specialist role because they were bred for a unique and specific reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't recall any of my 60 odd years where I have been working on a farm, understanding border collies herding sheep, working with someone who taught me how to. I don't understand it. Yeah. So living in a home, a lot of my clients or the clients that I worked with in the past, most of them have families, young children. And the problems they tend to face is when the children are moving around. Yeah. Now, people could say that all puppies and dogs do this. The next thing I'm about to say, the dog will interact with the young child. Yeah. But I tend to find the border collies interact a little bit more. Yeah. They're
Yeah.
bouncing around, like you said, which everyone used to think was a play bow, but they're not play bowing. They're doing that for a specific reason. They would force the children back to where they came from. I had one family who couldn't get their child to move around, so they had to have them in one of those, I forget what they're called, like a lead type thing. And the child had to follow the mother around during the day.
Right.
Otherwise, the dog would let the child off the sofa.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when we have these kind of problems, and I've gone round, I've been stuck in how to move forward. What type of things would you suggest in a situation like that?
Yeah. So this is so, so common. And interestingly enough, I mean, children are, I don't want to call it an easy target for a border collie. They're a common target for a border collie because they move a little bit more erratically. They move quickly. They might squeal and make, loud noises as they do it. And they can be quite exciting. But border collies are bred to control movement. So like you say, if the child sat still on the sofa, the border collie would probably not have any interest in them at all. It's when they jump up to move. And actually, even then, if they stood still, the border collie would then just stand still. So they are about controlling movement. And one of the base behaviors that every border collie should learn and be taught right from the very start is I use mat work, and I do it very similarly to the relaxation protocol. They have to be in a settle position. This isn't about boundary training where they just have to stay somewhere. I want to work with their emotions and I want them to learn to relax on that mat. Then I proof that with all sorts of movement because it's the movement that they find so triggering. If they don't know that they can be calm and it's not their job to control movement, they'll be up, they'll be, trying to control the whole wide world around them because that's what innately they're bred to do. So that for me is a real foundation skill for every border collie and would help actually prevent a lot of issues coming. It's not all down to that. Obviously, we need to work on impulse control. We need to work on the border collie being able to be moving, but it's just one of those steps that we can use, which is really, really helpful for all of our border collies.
That makes perfect sense. Proofing the movement so that the dog can get an understanding that I don't have to do this behavior anymore. I'm quite comfortable and happy and confident to see the child moving around.
Yeah.
Um, this one, border collies really get me because I've got thousands of things going through my head. I can't even pick one out. That's one of the things that on my way. The other one is more about adults. The taller the person, there is this specific area that border collies tend to attack, and it tends to be between the kneecap and the ankle. Is there a reason for that?
It can also be hands for moving. And again, it sort of depends on the reason why the dog is doing it, because as you'll know, with dogs in general, if they're anxious, they might come up and try and collect information from the face. So that's always more of an anxiety-led behavior. And with border collies, it's usually to do with movement. So obviously feet and legs are moving, and that's what they want to control, because if they can control the feet moving, then the person stands still. Border collie can take the pressure off. What you will get within this is different variation of why they're actually herding in the first place, or why they've flipped into herding mode. So if you've got, say, a nervous border collie, they're more likely to go around behind and then nip. So they're trying to move that person, not just make them stand still. They might sneak behind and be quite sneaky about it and then come up behind and nip. Those ones, it is herding type behavior, but they're probably more anxious about that person being there. Whereas some might jump around in front of you just trying to stop you. But the feet are moving, so they're the moving target, if you like. But a really interesting sort of part of all of this, and it sort of links into what we've been talking about, is what drives that emotion, what drives the initial thought process to create that behavior. Because it may be because they love herding, and I tend to refer to those as hardwired herders. They want to control everything. But also, if you've got a dog that is anxious and fearful, because herding is innately reinforcing, they might flip into herding mode because it makes them feel better. So you can also, within the behavior, get this sort of split between the hardwired herders that are just really impulsive, really good workers, if you were doing that, but it's spilled into inappropriate herding because they just haven't been taught the skills of time to switch off, mate, I've got this, you don't need to. Or the dog that's been allowed to maybe a bit too much. We can talk about freedom and choice in a moment, but they're a little bit anxious, but because they don't believe that the person's got their back, they feel that they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders and they have to take responsibility, and they go into herding mode to try and make them feel better, but they actually find it quite stressful. So the herding makes them feel better, but the driving force is because they're a bit of an insecure dog. So they're almost trying to self-soothe by doing what makes them feel good. So there's also that variation that you can get as well.
That actually reminds me of a young guy I was working with about 3, 4 years ago. And if he didn't speak to his collie when people were moving around in the house, it's okay, I've got this. The collie would nip, would go over and push them back, rise them back to the sofa area or the table. Wherever they were leaving that area, he would force them back. But when, I can't remember his name, if it was Eric, but when the owner said, I've got this, the dog would just stand still, watch intently, but wouldn't react. So that's quite interesting you say that, because I saw that firsthand, because I was one of those people he tried to push back towards the area. And as soon as the owner spoke to him, I've got this, I could move around freely. Yeah. It wasn't a dangerous dog, it wasn't an aggressive dog. He was just there. And you didn't want to step on him or walk into him, so you had to move back. Yeah. And I thought that was quite clever and intelligent, this particular dog, by coming so close that I had to make the decision, not him. He's already made his. So I had to move back. Yeah. And it was like he was getting a massive dopamine rush because I had done that.
Absolutely, because he's controlling the movement, and it's all about pressure. If you think about a border collie meeting up with a ewe head on, it's all about pressure. Who's going to bow to that pressure first? Yeah.
It's only recently that I learned more about border collie and the ewe. yeah, and the eyes, yeah, who gives first. And there was something, it was something going around on social media, and both were just staring at each other.
Oh,
But you could see the ew's eyes slightly moving, but the border collie's eyes did not move.
yeah.
Yeah, and the ewe just walked off calmly.
Yeah.
I felt that was quite amazing because
Yeah.
the majority of dogs I work with probably would have been that patient.
Yeah. They don't need to always go in with a nip to move them. They really have so much power with their eyes and their stance. Yeah.
So that was quite interesting. So if we look at, I've never worked with a border collie on a farm. I've never had that kind of a request. They're all indoors. And what I've learnt now is more, not so much about boundary training, but giving them an area where they can gravitate to, yeah, feel comfortable and confident from that air location, and proof it with all of the different sounds and movements within the home, yeah, namely young children, yeah, and movement of humans. What if we have that? I don't know the title you gave it. Those BCs that are extremely hardwired, yeah, are so hell bent on I'm going to move and control everything in this house. Yeah. From you, my owner, to the young child, to all of the guests. Again, these are not aggressive and dangerous dogs. They just become problematic being around them. Yeah. How do we
Yeah.
manage these dogs?
Yeah. And it's where it becomes difficult is what people see as dangerous or, because if they do nip, they're doing their border collie thing. It's not appropriate. Don't get me wrong. But they're not necessarily being aggressive. However, there's the flip side to that. So like you were saying earlier about, they stand there, they put the pressure on, and then you move away. And border collies can then get that real dopamine kick off of it. So they can learn to move people, which then does become problematic if they practice it and feel that they're in charge of all the people in the house. So it's really important to work with them, to teach them those boundaries, to teach them real clarity of step down. I've got this. You don't need to do that. Go and lie down, go and settle, so that they don't get that control over everybody in the house. They love clarity. They absolutely love clarity. And I will say the ones which are, I call them the hardwired herders, they're actually, I love them because they want to work. They want to do stuff. And so actually, if you really understand them, they're really easy to train because they want to work with you. So you can teach them what they should do instead, just as
Which,
easy.
yeah, I mean, generically, that's what most of us would do with most dogs. Um, but all the collies, oh my God, they're a different kettle of fish. Kettle of dog. I should say kettle of dog. Um, what outlet can an owner find within the realms of their home to give the dog that will sort of make the dog have a job to do and not worry so much about herding the humans of the home?
Yeah.
What would you suggest?
So when we talk about meeting a dog's needs, this is where it becomes really interesting because you'll get sort of two camps, if you like, of people that some people say, well, it's just because it needs to be on a farm. And I don't really work with very many border collies that live on a farm because actually they're in, we'll call it their natural habitat. And so therefore they don't have the same sorts of issues as what they do in a pet home because all of their needs are being met. They're not in the busy urban environment. But what I found is that actually not every border collie needs to be herding sheep or bulls or whatever, because actually that can make them worse sometimes. they actually need good basic training. And any form of training they will enjoy because they love learning. They're intelligent. They want to be doing something. So obviously they excel in dog sports. They're sort of the most popular breeds for obedience, for agility, but you don't have to do those sports with them. They're amazing search and rescue dogs. Several, do things like that. So scent work training. But they do need to have their physical needs met. They do need to be, active dogs and run, more so than some other breeds.
Yeah.
So they do need that to be met. There's so many household chores, if you like, that you can do with them, which they take it all very seriously as a job. So we talk about this within my academy where, some people get the dog to help them take the recycling out. The dog carries something or brings the logs in, or hands people something. Some people go as far as, loading or unloading the washing machine. There's lots of things around the house that they can actually join in on and see as their, their job. There was one border collie I spoke to somebody and they were having problems when they were loading the dishwasher or unloading the dishwasher. So as soon as the dog knew that the dishwasher was going to be unloaded, it would go bonkers around the kitchen, running at all of the kitchen cabinets and going bizarre. So I said, there's two ways that you can approach this. You can do your mat work and proof that you can move from the dishwasher to the places and the dog can stay calm, or teach the dog to open the drawers and the cupboards, like tie something on and then get the dog involved in the job, totally calmed down, opened the cupboards and really took it quite seriously because it knew what its job was, but stopped all of that neurotic behavior because it was really clear on what it was supposed to do. So they need mental stimulation as well as physical exercise to be happy and contented dogs.
You took the word right out of my mouth there, mental stimulation, enrichment, whatever you want to call it. And the more we have in our discussion, I'm looking and feeling that when we use enrichment with dogs generally, yeah, we need to have a good look at certain individuals and breeds that need more good, positive enrichment, and not just label it all as all dogs need enrichment. Yeah, we
And
need to understand. Sorry,
that's all right. It's something that I feel really passionate about is, are your walks enriching for your dog? And, because especially we'll take the car chasing as an example. Some dogs will car chase only on the way out on the walk. They'll have their walk, they won't do it on the way back because their walk has been so enriching, it's met their needs, and they're like, yeah, I don't need to do that anymore. Others might be the other way around, where they walk out calmly, they go on their walk, and they only do it on the way back. And for me, those dogs have been overstimulated on the walk. It hasn't been enriching. It's tipped them over threshold. And now they want to dart around and control everything because they're stressed. Obviously, you get the ones which are just doing it because they're cars and they're moving and they want to control. But there are certain things about, the walks, overthrowing of balls. And, border collies want to control movement. So they'll run after the ball, they'll get the ball, they'll bring it back, they'll drop it, they'll run back out into herding mode. And everybody thinks, oh, they want the ball thrown again. They want to stare at the ball. They want to control it. It's not all about the running after it and getting it. So it's understanding all of those aspects, if you like.
That part I totally understood. When I was working with a family again, they would throw the ball. This collie was just manic; it was just doing everything. But once the ball was thrown, it couldn't get to the ball quick enough. It would bring the ball back. And this collie learned very, very quickly, I'm not going to drop it at your feet because you keep picking it up. I'm going to drop it here and I'm going to move back and just look at it. Yeah. Stare at it. And I learned that's probably one of the only things I learned. He's not asking you to pick it up. What he wants to do is for it to remain where it is so he thinks he's still controlling it, not moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you really get into the nitty gritty of dogs. Even more fascinating when we get into the nitty gritty of breed specific. Yeah. But still remembering that within a breed, all dogs are still different. Yeah. But innately, they have that one thing in common that the breed was specifically bred for. So it's quite interesting. And I think we as dog trainers need to take that more on board. Yeah. And not just go rushing in with the training, training, training. What are we training? Yeah. Yeah. Let's look more at what do we need for this individual and their breed or their breed specifics. So the car one would be difficult. I tried it. I have referred people to you. How does one manage that when they are out with their dog, busy
Yeah,
high street, the bus is moving?
yeah. It's it can be tricky, and it's so with the car chasing, I sort of I break it down into three categories. So you get your dogs that are genuinely concerned and they're fearful and scared of the vehicles. You then at the opposite end of the extreme just get your hardwired herders that it's like it's moving, I need to control it. And then you get a middle category which might have started off scared and they lunged and barked at the car and the car went away and they're like, I'm amazing. I got rid of that. So that sort of makes them feel good. So then it almost becomes a bit of a game to them because it gives them that, you know, little internal boost of, I'm really good at this. And they're almost more playful about it, if you like. So it does depend on why the dog is doing it in the first place as to the approach that I would take. But I would say the majority of my work is actually done away from cars because you need foundation behaviors, just like with any form of reactivity. You need foundation behaviors before you can then work with the trigger in the presence of the trigger. So for the hardwired herders and for that middle group as well, so a lot of impulse control work, even teaching them to have impulse control going out of the door, you know, doorway manners. Can they walk on a loose lead? Because that comes down to impulse control as well. And again, if you have them so that they're out in front of you, even if they're not pulling on the lead, they've sort of forgotten you because you're behind. Whereas if they're by your side, then you can keep that connection a little bit more with them. But then eventually sort of teaching them, you know, you see a car, you look at me, see a car, you look at me, and then we can gradually keep moving with it as well. So I would say that the majority are in the middle category or the herding category, but you do get some which are in the fearful category as well. And for them, I have a different approach. I use loads of play with those and loads of nose work to help them. And this is where it's really interesting and the nuances of working with a border collie, because if you have, say, just a reactive border collie, but they're doing it because the herding makes them feel good, but actually they were scared, which do you work with first? Do you work with the fear or do you work with the herding? And that's where sometimes people just go for the fear element. And sometimes that might work, but sometimes it might not. But quite often, if you work with the herding part, which is really inappropriate behavior because it's not under control, our control, we haven't got the dog to understand, you know, its training, they're putting themselves under pressure. Whereas if they know that we've got their back and they don't have to deal with it, then actually the fear subsides as well. So with the nervous herders, then I actually approach it from the herding side. And that quite often then removes the fear because then they don't feel that they have to take responsibility for the thing.
That's really interesting that you look at it in three different categories because you've done your homework, you know your breed, and you can tell the slight differences between this dog A, B, and C. Whereas I probably would look at them and label them completely wrong. Yeah.
It's
Um,
really interesting with the body language. And this is again where a lot of herding dogs get mislabeled as fearful. because so one of the big things with a border collie is when they're herding, their tail should come down, whereas a lot of people read that as the dog being scared.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, they can misread the body language as well. But if you look at a border collie when they're herding and look at, you know, what they look like, they've lowered, but they're very intense. Whereas you tend to think of a fearful dog as making themselves smaller. The tail comes down into herding mode, but then they think because the tail's lowered that actually it's because it's fearful. So it's really knowing those nuances in the body language as well.
It's very important because the trained eye yourself, the dog is actually clearly giving me a story, yeah. Whereas my trained eye is not as trained on the breeds I'm looking at. Fearful, yeah. I'm not getting it, not picking up on it. That's why it's nice to have people like you in the industry that we can speak to, because you have that specialism, the understanding of the individual breed. If it was a Rottweiler or a Dobie, oh, those are the types of calls I want to take. Yeah, because I understand both breeds. The Border Collie ones and the Husky ones, not so much. Oh, I'll rephrase that. Not at all. There is no not so much. Yeah, I'm useless and hopeless when it comes to both breeds.
I think that's great, though, to actually know what type of dog that we like working with, because again, so many border collies are kicked out of puppy class and kicked out of training because they're disruptive, because they can't cope with all the movement going on around them. And then the people feel that they've got a bad dog, in inverted commas, whereas actually it was just that, you know, that pup was in a situation that actually they weren't ready for. But if the person who is running the class, do they then offer them any more help, or direct them to where they can get help, rather than the owners just feeling ashamed because their dog was so bad that they got expelled from school at an early age? And you know, that isn't helpful either, is it? So I think it's really good to be able to, you know where you can send other dogs. And you know, I've got friends, like I say, that work in specialist breeds, so I can refer to those people if people with other breeds approach me as well.
It's you know, the more we're talking, is the more I'm thinking about self as a trainer, and picturing you know, going back in time, and I can remember puppies, border collie puppies, coming into the class, fine in the first couple of weeks, and they get old very quick, they age very quickly, become more astute, and now all they're doing is to just their heads just flipping around the class, and as everyone's moving around, they're, you know, what I thought used to be a play bow, it was not really a play bow, yeah, and you know, they're edging forward, and as they're moving around with their owners, they are not in tune with the owner. They're in tune with everything else. Yeah. I find it fascinating when I look back. I miss maturity or understanding. But if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the more that you dive into one breed, the more you realize you don't know the nuances of all the other breeds. So, you know, I think it's fantastic that now there are people specializing in all of the different breeds, or a lot of the different breeds, because it's a specialist rather than just general dog training.
It definitely is a specialism. I mean, owners struggle because lots of us don't understand it. Yeah. Yes, we can go round and give them to do X, Y, and Z, and teach all these things, but we really don't know the nitty gritty. We don't understand the behavior as such. We're pairing that behavior with all the puppies that we're good working with, all those breeds we understand very well. But we're missing out here. This poor puppy's never going to get any further forward apart from a licky mat and a snuffle mat. Yeah, because we don't understand the breed. So I'm with you on that. It's good that we're seeing more and more trainers within the industry, and even new trainers I'm noticing coming in with one breed in mind. Yeah? And I think that can only be a good thing instead of everyone trying to be the jack of all trades of all breeds. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's beneficial to start off with all breeds.
Yeah.
Because then you really see the differences. And I'm not knocking trainers that work with all breeds, because it's you can still work with a border collie if you work with all breeds. It's just those cases that you can't, and it's being honest enough then that you're stuck, but you need more. And some people are very good with all breeds, but it's just, for me, it's so satisfying really getting those little nuances that go with it. So yeah.
Well, I know you know your stuff, and anyone listening to this knows that you know your stuff. Just before we finish up, if we are setting a plan for the walking or the exercise, would it be a good idea for people to sort of like pre-plan taking their dogs out for exercise? What they can do on those exercises and vary them each walk? Yeah. Or is that
Yeah.
not? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously everybody's got different access to different environments. My border collie Dingbat, he absolutely loves novelty. So finding new walks for him is really enriching. Whereas a nervous dog, that might not be the case. But also mixing what you do on a walk and being able to read your dog to go, okay, do they need to expel more energy? So things that I like to teach my border collies are to run around things, because they're bred to do massive outruns, aren't they? So you can teach them to go and run around a tree or goalposts or something like that. And they're getting, their needs met in running, but they're also coming back to you. It can be a fun game to do together. But we don't just want it all to be about flat out running. So then, okay, so we've done some physical exercise. Do they engage with the environment? Because I want my dogs to be able to sniff and, read all of the email that is around, and, to be able to calm down as well. It shouldn't all be about arousal. So I want to be able to mix it up on walks so that, they might climb on things to get confident in where their feet are, and their proprioception. So there's loads of things that we can do on walks. And maybe if we've had, a busy time, or maybe the dog's been in a busier environment one day, maybe we go somewhere calmer and quieter the next day, just to let them have, a bit of a detox, as a recovery day, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different things that we can do with them on walks. We can hide things for them to search for. We can play hide and seek with them, so they come and search for you. So really thinking about the effect of what we're doing and what effect it has on the dog.
So, in other words, we can be looking for different arousal activities, and bringing those arousal activities together. And I love the way you actually put in there dogs can have days off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if my two had their way, they'd have 7 days off. There are times we get ready to go out, and if it's really hot, I always go by what my Dobie tells me actually, because they've only got the one coat and it's a very thin coat. If it's too hot, you ain't going out. And if
Bless
it's
it.
raining and cold, she looks at me and I say, "Yeah, you made the right choice." But then I look to my right, my left, and to my Rottie saying, "I don't care." Yeah.
Yeah.
So I leave one behind and I have to go anyway.
My mini American Shepherd, she's a little princess, and she's like, oh no, it's too wet and windy today. I'll stay here. You border collies go and have fun. And all the collies are like, yeah, we don't care about the weather. Let's go and jump in some water troughs,
Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure having you and talking to you. I've learned loads, and I'm sure anyone who's going to be listening to us is going to take away lots of things as well. How can people find you if they need you?
So I'm mostly on Facebook or on my website. So my website is just dingbatdogtraining.co.uk, and my Facebook page is my name. It's Sarah Hedderly, and then Dingbat Dog Training.
Sarah, it's been an absolute pleasure. So until the next time, folks, it's goodbye from myself and Sarah. So until next time, goodbye.